the senator from Massachusetts, Elizabeth Warren.
Long time no see.
Yes.
Yeah.
You ready to go? Hello, MoveOn. Hey, so I love being here with you guys. This is fabulous. So, big idea.
Big idea. Go for it.
Big idea. I want an America that doesn't just work for a thin slice at the top. I want to build an America that works for all of us. Now, so how do you get there from here to there? And it starts by talking about what's broken, what's wrong. Because we have a government, powerful government in Washington that works great, fabulously for giant drug companies. Just not for people trying to get a prescription filled, right? It's a government that works terrifically for for-profit prisons. Just not for the people whose lives are being destroyed by those prisons. It's a government that works great for giant oil companies that want to drill everywhere. Just not for the rest of us who are worried about climate change bearing down upon us. So when you've got a government that works great for a thin slice at the top, works fabulously for those with money, and isn't working well for much of anyone else, that's corruption, pure and simple, and you need to call it out for what it is. You gotta have the courage to call it out, and then you gotta have a plan to beat it back, and that's what I've got. So, here's the good news. I have the biggest anti-corruption plan since Watergate. Here's the bad news. We need the biggest anti-corruption plan since Watergate. So this plan has a lot of different moving parts to it, and I'll tell you why. It's because money, the influence of money, is everywhere in Washington. It touches everything. Whatever issue brought you here today, if there's a decision to be made in Washington, I guarantee it has been influenced by money. So here's the plan. We got to fight back against it. We've got to be willing to call it out and to fight back. And let me give you some ideas for that. First one, end lobbying as we know it. They've had enough power long enough. Oh, and here's a part of my plan. Anyone who serves in Congress, who heads up an agency, who's part of the cabinet, who's a president, can never lobby. That's a lifetime ban once you've done that work, right? Oh, here's another one. End the revolving door between Wall Street and Washington. Enough. Just stop it on this. Oh, and how about one more on this? Supreme Court. How about we make the United States Supreme Court follow basic rules of ethics? Another part to the plan. Some of you may remember, because some of you fought alongside me for this, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau.
Yeah.
But you may remember the structural change it made. Scooping up all of those consumer protection laws that were scattered among a bunch of different agencies, but nobody took it seriously. Nobody ever had the real resources and authority to move on consumer protection. We need to do the same thing on ethics in Washington. We need an ethics agency, scoop it all up, and seriously enforce our conflicts of interest. Okay, and just one more. I could do this all day because it's got a lot of parts. But just one more. You really want to root out some corruption? Here's a way to do it. How about if we make everybody who runs for federal office put their tax returns online?
Yes.
Yes. So that's the idea. The idea is to fight back against the corruption. We fight back against the corruption. The change that's possible then, the democracy starts to work. So, what can we do? We get a 2-cent wealth tax.
Yes.
On the biggest fortunes in this country, the top 1/10 of 1%, $50 million above that, right? Your 50 millionth and first dollar, 2 cents. And then what do we do for the 2 cents? Universal child care for every baby age 0 to 5. Universal pre-K for every 3-year-old and 4-year-old in this country. Raise the wages of every child care worker and preschool teacher in this country to a professional level. And this is how we pay for universal technical school, 2-year college, and 4-year college for every one of our kids. Oh, and one more part. With that same 2 cents, think about it. All these things we can do, we can also cancel student loan debt for 95% of those who have it. That's how we get in the position to make the core structural changes in our economy we need to make, how we get in the position to be able to fight back on climate change and not just get nice sounding stuff, but things that are going to make a real difference to protect us and get us on the path we need to be on. That's how it is that we make this democracy work again.
I'd say you have a plan for that.
You got a plan. You got a plan for that.
She has a plan for that.
You got a plan for that.
She's got a plan for that.
Got a plan.
At a meta level, and really taking what that means into everyday people's lives. So what do you think the changes that you just talked about, how they will impact the day-to-day of people in this audience's lives and making government work better for them? And is it a racial justice issue?
Oh, you bet it's a racial justice issue.
Yeah.
You know, there's so many ways in which right now I come up with a plan and people say to me, the wealth tax.
Yep.
So what's the first thing that the reporters did when I announced a wealth tax? They went to a couple of billionaires. I'm not kidding you. And they said, so what do you think? And guess what? The billionaire said, no, not doing that. And I actually have had people tell me in Washington, well, if you're going to ask for more money from 1/10 of 1%, if you're going to ask for 2 cents on the dollar for their money above $50 million, you never get that done. You can't get that done in a democracy, and that's the part that really gets to me. It's the notion that Washington has fully absorbed. Those guys, look, I get it. They got more money than you do. They have more money than I do. I get that. But here's the deal. They don't own a bigger share of our democracy than the rest of us. And that's why we need to be in this fight. So I'll give you a perfect example on that. I have a housing bill, okay? And the idea behind this housing plan is to build about 3 million new housing units in this country. Yep. Moody's says it'll bring down the cost of housing across this nation by about 10%. We need this in urban areas. We need this in rural areas. Look, if you're going to buy a McMansion, plenty of opportunities for you. But if you're not, if you're middle class, if you're working class, if you're part of the working poor, if you're part of the poor, if you have disabilities, if you're a senior who wants to be able to age in place, if you want to have independent living, all of those things, we need to make a federal commitment. So think about that. It's over 3 million housing units. I've got it fully paid for by a tax, surprise, surprise, on the biggest estates in this country. Now, here's the deal. I talk about this, and I talk about it not just for what it means to build more housing, but also what it means for racial equity. You know, housing is the #1 way that families pass on wealth in America. So, you know, you buy that house, the asset appreciates over time, and then if the family's really lucky and grandma and grandpa can stay in it until they pass, they hand on that value to the next generation. And that's how you lift up generation after generation. And that's how it's worked for a long time. So it should surprise no one in here that starting relatively early in the 20th century, America, our government, started investing in the purchase of housing, subsidizing it for white people, but not for black people, not for people who lived in communities of color. They used redlining to actively discriminate. That was still going on until the 1960s. Think about that. So my proposal, and it's felt in not only the housing statistics, but wealth statistics, the black-white wealth gap. So my proposal says that we're going to build about 3 million new housing units overall, but we're going to stop and acknowledge the role that discrimination has played generation after generation in America. And we're going to set aside money to make sure that first-time home buyers who live in formerly redlined areas or people who got cheated during the housing crash in those areas are going to have some assistance to be able to buy homes and get on that wealth building path. So there's an example.
Great. That's great, Senator. So we got to ask our MoveOn member question here, which comes from Sharon, a MoveOn member from Nevada. Ask,
Hi, Sharon.
hello, Sharon. Hope you're watching. Gun violence is out of control.
Yes.
There is an overwhelming surge in mass shootings nationwide. We saw what happened, unfortunately, yesterday in Virginia Beach. And so as a result, our places of worship, schools, and concert venues are under attack in this country. What are your plans on gun control moving forward?
Okay, so it's a really good question, but I really want to reframe this a little bit. We talk a lot about mass shootings, and I'm very sorry about what happened yesterday in Virginia Beach. But it's not just mass shootings. This is happening all across America. It's happening on sidewalks and playgrounds, in people's backyards. It's happening family by family across this country, and it doesn't get the same headlines.
No.
And that is wrong.
Yes.
We have a gun problem in America, and it is putting our children at risk all across this nation. Yep. Remember how I started with corruption?
Corruption, yep.
Yeah. The NRA is holding Congress hostage, and it's time to fight back. It is time to fight back. So here's how I see this. 7 children today, children and teens, will likely die from gun violence. It'll happen again tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day. If 7 of our children were dying from a mysterious illness, we would pull out all the stops, figuring out what was wrong and what we could do to protect our children. Why? Because we understand we have a moral responsibility to protect our children. Well, the same is true with gun safety. We need to move, and we need to move now. Universal background checks. Weapons of war do not belong on our streets and sidewalks. We need the research into it to figure out which pieces work best, but we need to treat this like the public health emergency that it is. Thank you. Thanks, Sharon.
We've got about 3 minutes left.
3 minutes left.
So just a couple, one last question.
Sure.
What do you say to the young voter today who is turned off to politics and who doesn't think their vote matters because of what they see every day on TV, and they feel too hopeless to change it?
Oh,
Yeah.
She's got a
This
plan
is
for
it.
that.
He has a plan for
I got a
that.
plan for that.
Plan for that. Yeah.
But it's true. Look, a lot of people want to talk about the guy in the White House, and I get it. Ugh. But we need to think about an America that was broken long before he arrived there. The America that elected him, right? That is a broken country. That is a country with serious problems. But here's the deal. We have the chance in 2020 to take it all and make this country work. To make it work, not just for a thin slice at the top, not just for cronies and people who are somehow in the favored group, but to make it work for all of us. And this touches the lives of every single human being. 43 million Americans have student loan debt who could see it canceled if we get that 2-cent wealth tax. 12 million children could be in high-quality child care. People could have housing. People could have a democracy that they can count on. We could really take the steps to reverse the effects of climate change, to be able to get ahead of this fight. And here's the deal. We have the power. There's more of us than there is of them.
Amen.
Yes. So, what it's going to take is for all of us to be in this fight, and it's both halves. I say this a lot when I'm out. We got to do both halves. We got to dream big, and we got to fight hard. That's how we're going to do it.
Thank you, Senator Warren.
She has a